If you're a business leader, you're probably wasting resources on something that's not your number one goal, which means you are not using the military principle economy of force. In this video, I'll be defining what economies of force is. I'll talk through a couple examples. I'll go through the 3 ways that a business leader can use economies of force today. If you get any value out of this video, please hit the like button to support the channel. One important point about economies of force is that it is one of the 9 principles of war. So let's talk about those first. The 9 principles of war are fundamental truths of how to execute a successful military operation and have been proven over and over throughout military history. You can see economy right here is economies of force. So to put that simply, economies of force is one of the most important military principles that has been thought of over the last 150 years. Now let's jump into the definition. Economies of force is using the minimum necessary combat power on secondary objectives, allowing for the concentration of the majority of available force on the most crucial area to achieve victory. Massing and economies of force are kind of yin and yangs. I made a separate video on massing, but economies of force supports massing significantly. And what it says is that you cannot mass properly if you are wasting your resources on secondary objectives. So if you fail at your number one goal in any year, that means you likely spent too much time doing things that are not your number one goal and working towards other things and not totally realizing that you are just completely wasting your resources and your time on things that are not your number one objective. So let's jump into a military tactical example of how economies of force is used in combat. All right, so here we have a very simple tactical scenario. We have 3 enemy platoons at the top. The middle one here is on a hill. That's what these lines are. So we're saying this is key terrain and we are on a hill. So on the bottom, we have 3 friendly infantry companies. So we have a battalion and we have 2 sections of 81 millimeter mortars. So in this scenario, say we are the commander of the friendly battalion and our objective is this hill and to destroy these 3 enemies. And what we realize is if we can take this hill, that gives us a massive advantage in the long term to destroying any enemy in this area. So we decide we are going to do a frontal attack with all 3 of our companies. And what economies of force would say is we will use our 81 millimeter mortars and our infantry as sparingly as we possibly can on secondary objectives. So in this case, what that would mean, if we were massing properly, we would shoot all of our mortars at the main effort objective. So what that means is it would be a good idea to shoot mortars at this objective. It could be a good idea to shoot mortars at this objective. It could be a good idea to use one of these companies as security to our left flank or on our right flank. All of those are good ideas, but they would be very subordinate and secondary objectives to our main effort attack, which is destroying the enemy on this hill. So if we are massing on the enemies on this hill, that means to economize our resources, we are going to use as few resources on this enemy as we can, and this enemy as we can, and even on security on our flanks. So as little resources on those things as we possibly can. And what that will do is it will allow us to mass as much of our combat power on destroying this main effort objective. And that is what economies of force is, and you can see how closely related to massing it is. All right, so you can see economies of force is a fairly simple idea. It is don't waste your time and your resources so that you can use them on your number one objective where you're going to provide as much value as a business leader. But if you're not paying attention, it's very easy to slip into saying, oh, these are pretty good ideas and start wasting resources everywhere. Let's talk through the 3 ways a business leader can start using economies of force today. So this process is very similar to massing, but it really starts with identifying your biggest opportunity. And the best way to do that is figure out what would be the number one way to provide value for your stakeholders for this year. And then what are the max number of resources you need for that? And the best way to identify that is ask yourself, how could I do my number one value project in half the time? That will allow you to start coming up with good ways that you can mass on this objective. And third is really what economies of force is asking yourself is what and who could I get by with less? Meaning who on my team is doing things that are likely not value added? How can I take them off of those projects? Could I get them to reduce the number of things that they're doing? Could I fight to get them off things that don't make sense? Especially if those people can be helpful in delivering your number one value project for the year. So Economies of Force is taking a really hard look at everything your team is doing and ensuring that it is providing support to your number one project, or at least one of your number one projects. That is what Economies of Force is. All right, let's jump straight into a quick civilian example of what Economies of Force looks like. All right, similar setup to massing, but the lesson will be slightly different. At the top, we have 5 units of work, 3 of them being opportunities and 2 of them being steady state work. At the bottom, we have 4 units of resources, meaning this is some combination of people, money, and equipment. As a business leader, that is what you have. You have time, money, and you have gear and equipment to work with. And everybody has a finite amount of that, no matter if you're the biggest company or the director or senior manager at a smaller company. You have people, money, and equipment to work with. What the principle of Economies of Force says is that we will try to use as few resources on the steady state as we can. So how do we cut steady state down to, say we used to use 2 people for steady state, and instead now we're going to push 1 person to do all the steady state work, or we're going to just cut one of these things in steady state as best we can and just not do it. And then that will open up an entire resource, or maybe a resource and a half, or a whole unit to focus on our number one opportunity, which we're going to say is opportunity 3. And maybe even number 4 can get in on it. But the most important thing is we are trying to mass on our biggest opportunity so that it is successful. So if you're not getting the results that you want in anything, it's because you're likely not massing hard enough. And one of the reasons you're not able to mass is because you are burning your resources on opportunity 2 and opportunity 1 and on steady state work that is not providing as much value as your biggest opportunity. So be very, very cautious of any time you're using resources on any subordinate goals and steady state work. If you can cut those and limit the amount of impact they have, then you are using the principle of Economies of Force. So Economies of Force is very closely related to massing. Like I said in the massing video, I think the leader's number one job is to prioritize and focus their resources on the biggest opportunity. If a leader can do that, then they will get results and be successful. And to do that, you have to economize your resources. And that, in my opinion, is actually a little bit harder than what massing is. Because as a team and as a leader, your people will be coming to you with good ideas. They'll say, hey, I have this good idea. We should do this, or we should do that. And you as a leader, if you're going to economize your resources, you have to say no to a lot of things. And they can be good ideas. Or your team will say, hey, I need employees to do this, or I need more money for this project. And you have to say, no, you're not getting more money and you're not getting more people, because all of us are focusing on this number one goal and we've all aligned on that, and that is my decision. And that's a hard thing to say, and a lot of leaders get caught up in doing too much stuff, and a lot of people get caught in doing too much stuff, which is the principle of massing and Economies of Force. So massing, hammer on your number one opportunity. Economies of Force is don't let your resources to get dispersed and wasted otherwhere, because then you'll realize they're all tied up and you're not able to use them to mass on your biggest opportunity when you need them. All right, thanks for watching. You can watch my next video by clicking on the thumbnail on this end screen. Warren Business 6 out.